So there's also this famous example of Dropbox, where Dropbox founder kind of creates a very basic video of how what the functionality is, and how easy is it to use and what does it serve, and launches the video. That, even a video could be a small MVP, whether to test, people are interested in the idea or not. So once he launches the video, right, overnight there were close to 75,000 people who have signed up to the product. So even though he might not have a product, building something with very minimum functionality and showing people how it works, uh, you know uh, helped him validate if there is enough interest or not.
Hey everyone, welcome to our broadcast, Everything Product. So in this podcast, we talk about latest tech insights as well as the product management concepts. And today we have a very interesting topic that is MVP, which means minimal viable product. And we're going to talk about the use cases, what an MVP is, and also some of the tips that one can leverage in executing an MVP. As we all know, I mean, MVP is a pretty common a term used in various product companies and also by product managers, and it's probably a must for some of the features that we plan to build where we understand the customer needs. So, funny. I mean, what do you think an MVP is that you would like to share for our viewers?
Yeah, definitely, Srinath. So let's let's take an example to make it like super simple, right? So for example, Sidhu is a startup founder. He just started a company and he has a very interesting idea. So now he can't wait to get so much funding to build a full blown product and then give it to all of his customers to see his idea is good. What he has to do is he has limited funding. Let's say he has $100,000. With that, he has to hire people, he has to build a product, and then he needs to launch it. That's where an MVP comes into picture. He identifies all the basic functionalities that is needed, builds a product with that, and just gives it to the customer, and then continues to get that feedback. And that's what an MVP is: a minimum viable product that a customer can use and give feedback to you.
A lot of people debate whether it's a minimum viable product, minimum lovable product, and there are a lot of terms which are floating around, and people kind of fight about these terminology and all of that stuff. But I feel that it's more of a concept, as Funny was saying, right, where the MVP will basically help you validate if your idea is viable or not, right, with your users. So it is the minimum value that you're providing to your customer to gauge their interest and also prove your hypothesis right or wrong. So that's the way I put at it. If you look at a MVP, and there are a lot of examples to which we can look at and understand, like what is a MVP and how can we implement that in our products, right? So there's also this famous example of Dropbox, where Dropbox founder kind of creates a very basic video of how what the functionality is, and how easy is it to use and what does it serve, and launches the video. That, even a video could be a small MVP, whether to test, people are interested in the idea or not. So once he launches the video, right, overnight there were close to 75,000 people who have signed up to the product. So even though he might not have a product, Dropbox is a complex product, right? It basically deals with a lot of integration with a lot of different hardware, OS and all of that stuff, right? But still, maybe building something with very minimum functionality and showing people how it works, uh, you know, uh, helped him validate if there is enough interest or not. So that, as simple as that. So it could be the minimum thing which you can put together to gauge the interest, I'd say.
It's basically when you launch a product, you're trying to understand what customer is looking for rather than what we think is right, which we may not always be true. I think MVP really helps to validate that. I definitely like to double click more on some of the favorite examples later in the call. So, I think you brought up one, which is Dropbox, which I was also amazed. So Now, I would like to understand why an MVP is needed and when one should use an MVP.
Yeah, so I feel that, right, like how much ever you research, talk to the customers, try to understand the user needs, and gauge all of these before building something, that's not enough, right? And the market out is very uncertain and keeps changing very frequently, and user needs also change very frequently, even preferences. So the best way to reduce uncertainty is to build something that has minimum functionality and that provides value to the users, and put it in their hands and see how they use it. So that's the best way where we can reduce uncertainty and also know if it actually provides value or not.
I see the same way too, right? So especially take a scenario where you don't know whether it will work or not. I think that's where you need to build an MVP. I was watching a video sometime back of what's his name, Michael Siebel, I believe, also the founder of Twitch or something like that, right? So he was talking about the Twitch's initial MVP. One of their co-founders basically kept a camera in his room, and then he just left the camera on for 24 hours, just doing his daily things. And that's what the MVP is, right? So he was able to prove with that hypothesis that people would be interested to watch other people just doing casual things on a daily basis. And that's what started the startup, and now it's a huge company earning what, like billions of dollars.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So similar to that, even there is one other example, right, where Buffer is a social scheduling tool. So looks like in the initial days where Buffer was coming up with its product, it had just a landing page with saying, okay, so it had just four lines on it. It said, tweet more consistently with Buffer. That was the hook line, and there were three steps. The first step was choose times to tweet, add tweets to your Buffer, and Buffer does the rest. So it's almost like a scheduling tool that's helping people schedule posts and all of that stuff. It may look very common now, but 5 or 10 years back this was not common, right? People wanted this convenience of scheduling at their will, right? Scheduling all the posts week ahead and all of that stuff. So this could be something which is communicating the value to the people, and this is the MVP for them, right? And when they launched this, they had a huge list of people subscribed to this specific product. So as simple as that.
And one of my favorite that I would like to share was Zappos. So Zappos initially started. For viewers who don't know much about Zappos, Zappos is basically an online shoe store where people can buy shoes. So Zappos basically started, as an MVP, where the founder was trying to shop around for shoes, and he couldn't get the size he wanted and the designs he wanted. Then he felt like, okay, he needs to build something and validate with the customers. So what he first did was he took basically the photos inside a shoe store and went back and created a website with all the photos and of all these different shoes. So when a customer and he launched that as an MVP, and the way he built that was when he kept all the photos in the website, and if a person clicks and an order gets submitted, but again, he used to take that order, go manually to a shoe store and fulfill that to the customer. So he was essentially trying to gauge the customer's interest before he goes and build a complete e-commerce website for shoes, which is there's a lot of cost involved, as both of you mentioned. So that was interesting for me. I'm sure there are other examples as well, like Uber. I think Spotify also started as an MVP. So definitely some great companies there who started as an MVP and made billions of dollars.
Yep.
All right. Now I would like to understand and let's bit more on the types of MVPs. I mean, there are various types of MVPs out there. We may need a different strategy for MVP depending on the product or the type that we are launching. Can you guys throw any light into the types of MVPs? Funny, do you want to share anything on that?
Let me start with this one. Right? This is something that I learned when I was at Wayfair. So BVP. For the first time, I heard okay, BVP. What is that? Barely viable product. I think this is super helpful, especially when you have internal teams that are managing something. So imagine this. Let's say you're a e-commerce company. You're trying to ship certain things to the customer, right? Let's take Srinath's example of Zappos. So you put certain things, and then a customer ordered something. So all this product barely has is a mechanism to get an order, and that also probably at the end of the day is probably sitting in some kind of database which is very basic, doesn't have enough details. In the back end, once the order comes, so a person literally manually understands what is the address, manually sees what is the shoe, manually goes to the store, manually ships it, manually gets the shipping code, and then manually emails that to the customer. So if you think of the entire process, other than the initial order that came to Zappos, everything else is done manual. So this is a barely viable product. And any issues that comes, you literally have to call the customer, or you might have to email the customer. Everything goes manual except for like one or two steps. So this was very intriguing at that point, because you literally don't even have bare bones to start a company, but you can still do that.
Sidhu, I'm sure in your experience, you might have used different strategies for MVPs. You can share any experience with the viewers?
Yeah, Srinath. So, there's a lot of misconception of like people thinking MVPs is just it's only the product, right? But that's not true. Even a landing page could be a minimum viable product which could validate your hypothesis, right? Or it could be a prototype, or it could be something which is very piecemeal, where you build an MVP, launch it and expand on it, and build multiple MVPs on top, right? Where each feature could be a very minimal viable for product which people could test, use, and see if it's useful or not, right? So that's as simple as it is. So recently, one example which I came across in the products which I use, right? Notion kind of integrated ChatGPT, OpenAI's AI feature into Notion. They launched it as an MVP, where they actually gave it to a set of users, and they gave unlimited credits, where people can play around with it. And they built minimum functionality where you can ask it for ideas, you could ask it to improve your writing, and you could ask it to maybe generate tasks and all of that stuff. So as people saw this feature and started using it, they now converted it into a payment plan where you have certain set of credits which you can use, and also they have added more and more use cases. So that's as simple as it is. Right now your product could be basically just tied to an API to see and provide the functionality to the users, see if they're using it or not, and then iterate and add more and more to it as you see fit.
I didn't know that the Notion's backend was OpenAI, dude. Because I thought OpenAI does really well. I don't know. I'm not a fan of Notion's AI at all. I didn't know.
Yeah, no, Notion's AI, yeah, they use ChatGPT. Like I think Notion, Canva, and all of them use ChatGPT.
Okay.
Yeah, recently I've been using that. It was pretty accurate, at least based on my experience.
Yeah. And funny, so for our podcast, right? Like I was trying to, for one of the episodes, I was trying to extract the transcript and then make it give us meeting kind of a description and also timestamps and all of that stuff. But with ChatGPT, right, it limits the text. You cannot do it, right? So you have to paste it in like 7 or 8 different segments and tell it to wait and all of that stuff. But in Notion, when you copy that, it automatically takes everything. I think it's using the API. That's why it's not restricting you through the same as the user interface which you are using. So that was helpful sometimes.
Got it. Nice. So if I can understand correctly on the types of the different MVPs, so looks like there are two different types here, right? One is looks like a high fidelity MVP, which is probably where you have a small feature built and you're trying to test that experience. And the other one is more like a low fidelity, which is more around sending a survey, creating a landing page, and trying to get a user interaction. Maybe I think the Dropbox video that you were mentioning, Sidhu. Am I understanding this correctly, or am I missing
Yeah,
anything?
yeah. So we could categorize them into high fidelity and low fidelity. Low fidelity has multiple different versions of it, right? A landing page, a video, all of in a prototype could be low fidelity. High fidelity, it is more like a usable product, right, where you kind of put a UI together, which has bare minimal things where the person can go in and use it, right? So that could be something like a high fidelity. And even higher fidelities could be something like maybe Apple's latest launch, the Vision Pro. I feel that is also some kind of an MVP from their side, where they're building everything up, but they're still validating if that idea is right or wrong sometimes.
Got it. Yeah, yeah. Vision Pro. I think I was recently watching that video, and I was really amazed how it's coming up with the new spatial computing concept and all. But yeah,
My first impressions were right. I think Apple was the first company who did it right, at least when we look at the form factor and the usability of it, because a lot of companies tried it, but it still had that usability issues and all of that stuff.
yeah, yeah. I'll be very curious about the adoption, given the cost it has. But again, that's another thing that we need to think about. So, all right. So now let's dive into kind of the real use cases where we have used MVPs. I'm sure a lot of product managers out there or aspiring product managers out there might be figuring out when and like where they can use that MVP in their product development lifecycle. Funny, I'm sure in your experience, you might have used an MVP, right? Can you share to our viewers your experience, a use case that can be helpful for our viewers?
Yeah, definitely, Srinath. So the moment I think about MVP, right, the first thing that came to my mind is some personalization that work that I did it into it. So let's think of a customer who wants to come to Mint and then add one of their financial institutions. At one point of time, Intuit had a screen which is very static. There is a list of financial institutions, and any customer comes there. If it's applicable to them, they just click on it. Otherwise, they just go to the search bar, search for something, and then find their financial institution. Very time consuming, and you don't know whether customer would spend so much time to take it or not. We had an idea to say, can we personalize that experience to show something relevant for the customer? What we did was we built an experience very minimal, didn't put much logic behind. We just ran a simple query to say, hey, these are the top financial institutions, or if a customer had this financial institution, there is a good chance the customer has this one as well. We ran that query, got the list of financial institutions, manually hard coded that, and then did an experiment for like 2 weeks. What we were able to understand with that is the customers are connecting more financial institutions than when it was static. It was a very good MVP for us. But now if you think about how that's being done, there is crazy amount of AI that is built behind that. And we are using 10 different data sources to figure out what is the right thing for the customer to show the data. So a very simple test panned out to be a huge product, which is helping millions of customers. So that's one that I could always think about. Like always do something minimal to just understand what customer needs, and then expand on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome to hear. You transformed something, a low fidelity MVP, into a very successful product. So, which with a lot of rich information for customers. Sidhu, I'm sure you might have used an MVP in your work experience. Anything that you could share?
Yeah, Srinath. So one example would be when I was working for Global Traffic Technologies, right? So I was working on a specific product, which basically this product helps transit vehicles, choose better routes, and they help. And it helps with fuel efficiency, transit planning, and all of that stuff. So cities use this product, and what we were seeing is a lot of cities were using this product but also building a dashboard for consuming this data and all of that stuff. So we thought that there is an opportunity for us to maybe build dashboards for these people and maybe provide insights on how they can improve all of the stuff which where that they're targeting for that quarter, which could be fuel efficiency, removing buses from the route, which is cost savings and all of that stuff. The MVP which we built was, instead of we building a website or a UI with all of this stuff, right, we basically grabbed all the information and put it into Tableau and gave people access to the Tableau dashboards. There are public Tableau dashboards which you can give access towards. So once we started with that, right, that specific city was using it, and then we introduced that to more customers. Once people started seeing more and more interest, that's where we moved towards building a new product. And some insights which we actually got from that exercise was that each city wanted different metrics. Initially we had a standard set of metrics, so that actually gave us insights of building a customizable dashboard, right? If we would have not gone this route of doing it as an MVP, we maybe would have built a complete full-blown website and then found out that this is not good for everybody, it's only good for a segment of people, and we need extra features to maybe launch it for the extra people. But taking this MVP approach helped us test our hypothesis that the customers would want this and also would use this, and they would find this thing valuable, I'd say.
I have a question for you, Sidhu. So
Yeah.
when you do such things, right, how do you decide what features would come under the MVP?
When we say, right, so what the user is looking for, right, so what is the value he wants to get to. So when you look at this specific dashboard, right, people are putting together dashboards, but what they want is they want insights on how can they optimize for fuel efficiency and also optimize for removing more buses from the route. So imagine there are 8 or 9 buses scheduled, right, based on the people who are coming in, going out. If the city is able to just remove one bus out of the complete schedule, that's a 100,000 cost savings for that city. So imagine the value they're getting, right? So for the product which they are actually paying for, that's saving them a lot of money. So that's how we try to validate, like, what is the goal of this and what is the value we are trying to provide to the city.
So you identified all the basic things that they need, and once you identified those basic ones, you said, okay, these are the minimum set of features that I need to build, and then I can launch and gather the feedback. That's good. Actually, I want to ask, go ahead.
One follow-up thing, and that was only good for a set of customers, right? That's what I said. As we gave it to more people, we found out that these metrics were not good for everybody, because each city had different targets for that H1 H2 yearly planning which they were going through. So that's where we had to come up with a bulk set of metrics which people had to come in and pull and customize based on
Then
what they want.
you basically went into like a full-blown product and then started to build everything that's needed. I want to ask one more follow-up question there, right? A very key thing that you mentioned there is the customer. So how do you find the customer that is more relevant for you? Like, how do you reach out to say, hey, I have a crappy product, but it does some functionality. So would you be interested to try it out?
So there was also a pre-step which we did, funny. So there was a prototyping session which we did with the customer itself, right? So he was part of making the solution and being part of the ideation session of putting all of these things together. Once we had that, we took the prototype to multiple other customers to validate if it's actually solving their problem or not. So that was a initial indication that there is some interest around this product, and then we went into this route of building a Tableau dashboard.
Sidhu, basically what you did is you found a customer way early in the game and then did some kind of a low fidelity mockups just to see how the customer is reacting, understanding what they would do, and then ended up building an MVP that would basically solve for that customer or bunch of similar customers for that product.
So bunch of similar customers for that product.
No, love the way you approached it as well, right? Because
Yeah, and also maybe to throw some light, right? The root of the problem actually came from a customer interview which we were doing. In the customer interview, what so there was a city official who was mentioning saying that we have a data team, right? Three or four people who's actually just assigned to grab data, put it into Excel sheets, and put it in a way that they could report this to a stakeholder. So I thought that was a very manual thing which we can actually automate it. And I'm assuming most of our customers are doing some sort of this work to make sense.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty good framework. So one thing from my experience that I would like to add here is, especially working in the B2B space and B2B customers, one thing which was really handy for me when finding that customers was working closely with our the sales and professional services folks who are pretty close to customers and understand their pain points. What are the different functionalities that they're looking at? So during like my syncs with them, I try to get a feeling of who are those customers, probably who might be interested in this product. So that way I can get that and to gauge their interest as well. That way I could get a little more easy adoption. And another thing which really worked for me was looking at our customer satisfaction surveys and some of the product feedback. So looking at some of the customers who are talking about that specific features or functionalities, that really helped me to nail it down to a few people. And I mean, obviously, sales folks were really helpful in getting me those customers.
Nice. Actually, I have a question here. It's like Sidhu was telling, right? A minimum viable product is a generalized term. So depending on the industry, depending on the product, it could vary a lot. Apple spent probably like 5 years to build their MVP for Vision Pro, but Facebook launched their um, VR AR classes. What I don't know. It feels like a decade ago. It might not be that much, but they have proven this hypothesis like way ahead of the game, and obviously they made like millions of dollars just through their VR classes. So, what are the constraints that that you think a product manager has to keep when defining an MVP?
Few things which I can think of are the time, the resources, especially resources for a minimal viable product. In order to justify as a product manager to your leadership, you need to basically tell them, "Oh, I'm going to spend only this much resources to build that," because or else they may think that when it's too much cost, we will rather use that for building another important product feature or something. So I will say resource is one of the big thing, as well as time. I feel like it needs to be a time bound experiment because we cannot do an MVP forever. Because if you're doing an MVP forever, then probably our competitors are going to outpace that. So these are the two things that I can think of. Anything from both of your experience?
Very very similar, honestly. I want to give this example of like Elon Musk or Steve Jobs here, right? So every product that they have built, before they built it, Steve Jobs is on the other side. He doesn't tell anything first. He just comes and tells that, hey, this is the product. But internally, what I heard, what I've seen in his movie or the book and stuff, is he goes to the team and says, hey, this is the timeline. Okay, he doesn't know anything about the product. He doesn't know what is being built exactly, how much time it's going to take, how complex it is. Nothing. He's just going to go and say, hey, this is when we are launching it. Now the team has to scramble big time to make it happen by that. So when you have that constraint of imaginary timeline, you will make sure whatever is literally required at a bare bones is what is built. Same thing with Elon Musk as well. Elon Musk is on the other side, right? He's like he goes to a public forum and says that, dude, this is gonna come by this time. Obviously, it's not gonna come at that time, or in a year after that, or in a year after that. But still, it gives that constraint to the team so that they built it much faster.
Funny,
Yeah.
as you're talking through this, right, something popped up in my mind, right? So we built MVP for certain purposes, right? Testing the hypothesis, gauging the interest to the users. And when we look at the what is the Tesla robo called? Optimus? Optimus,
Optimus,
right?
yeah.
When you look at the
Optimus.
Optimus, right, it is an MVP, but the MVP, I think the target is not the users, but the target is employees who want to come and work for that vision, right? So MVP can also be built to bring, or bring in people to work for the company. I think that's what Elon does through this thing, right?
Man, I love that
Yeah.
example. Yeah, because even we do that, right? So, in order for us to get
Yep.
funding from our leadership, like Srinath was mentioning some time back, we want to build a product and prove that, hey, this is something that works. So, I feel like Elon Musk does that in a much larger scale. I don't know which video we spoke
Yep.
about that, but it's like putting it out there would encourage people, not just people actually, even the funders, stakeholders, and everyone to say, okay, now I can still keep the money in Tesla because something else bigger is coming up in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, and I believe
Yeah,
that
I
like people
think.
who are working for Neuralink or Optimus and all of these people, right? There are more people who are motivated through the idea, the Elon's idea, or passion towards it, rather than money or something else, right?
Yeah. So no, I mean, thinking about Elon Musk tweets when you guys were talking about that. Now I feel like he always uses the low fidelity MVPs where he just posts a question and try to gather customer like the user feedback or the sentiment. I think he does it really well there.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so now since we talked about some of the different types of MVPs, our experiences, I'm sure there are a lot of learnings and pitfalls on how to not do an MVP. So I think that's going to be very beneficial for a lot of people who might have not executed an MVP before. Funny, do you want to add any tips how to not to do an MVP?
Um, I don't know. The very first thing that comes to mind is just make sure, just validate whether you need to do an MVP or not. So, first of all, why do you need to do an MVP? Like, you need to do an MVP when you have limited constraints. Like, let's say you have limited time, you have limited money, you have limited staffing, and uh, probably this is something that has not been proven in the market or not been proven in your product. So, at that point, it makes sense to probably do an MVP to prove that hypothesis or prove that assumption. So my biggest recommendation to whoever is trying to do this for the first time is, just because this terminology is there or just because a product manager is expected to build something which is minimal, don't just go and build it. Rather, make sure that in this scenario an MVP is something that is needed, and make sure to think about the constraints really well. Like, is this something that's actually solving a customer problem? Just because you have limited stuff doesn't mean you remove literally everything that's needed for the customer or build something. Because if you build something scrappy like that, you might be demotivated because you might not be seeing the initial results that you want to see.
Yep.
Can you
Yeah.
share any like if you have any experience where an MVP did not work out?
No. I always build best MVPs.
I know you're at best, but
No, I had these scenarios multiple times, right? I can go back to the personalization example that I was talking about. So even in that personalization, we have tried several other things. One of the things that we tried was, can we just utilize location? Okay. So for example, if you're someone who is based out of Pittsburgh, just taking my example, like when I came to US, I was in Pittsburgh. So there's a very good chance you might be using PNC. Okay, because that's one
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
prominent banks there.
That was my
Or
first
let's
bank.
say, yeah, exactly. So we tried something like that, but it became very complicated because now you're looking at personalized data for the customer, which might be available, might not be available. So it became way more complicated to analyze some of the data. Hopefully, with the improvements in AI, that would become much more simpler in the future. But when we were trying that out, it was not worth it. So we tried an experiment, didn't work out, continued with another one.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, become a very good point for a lot of our viewers, right? Especially there's a lot of time and effort involved in building an MVP. Not every product may need an MVP, so it's trying to figure out what that clear goal and criteria. What are we trying to achieve? That's very important because you're trying to build a lot of justification and get alignment from your leadership, and it's not easy, and we need to make sure we execute it right.
I also feel that it's not like a one time thing, right? For every product you just build one MVP, validate it, and then stop doing MVPs later, right? So it's more like a mindset where everything you build something new is minimum viable, right? You're trying to test something, see something. And I feel that like there are a lot of times when people don't understand these nuances, MVPs fell apart. And some of the problems, right? So people, I see a lot of people emphasize with a lot of minimalism, right? Minimalism is not the criteria, value is the criteria, right? Just having one or two features which don't cater to any customer or doesn't add value doesn't make it an MVP. So that's we see a lot of these examples a lot of time, right? And sometimes also people are building MVPs and neglecting the user experience, right? Minimum viable doesn't mean crappy user experience, right? Even with minimum viability or an MVP, you can have really, really good user experience. And also don't equate user experience with UI design, right? UI design is something, user interface design and all of that is different from the experience the user is will be having using that MVP. So don't neglect that. And also I see that a lot of people have an MVP but don't test it a lot, right? Because I think you need enough data to prove your hypothesis right or wrong. There might be instances where you say that there is a specific user segment you're targeting, but you test the MVP against a different segment, which is completely gives you results which are not what you want, right? So I think that is something which you want to do. Test it till a point where you actually get the right amount of sample data to verify your hypothesis is true or not. And one other thing I would want to mention is, right, resistance to change, right? You might love an idea and have created an MVP which you work towards, and you really love the design, all of that stuff, and you basically go out and test it out and see that the hypothesis is wrong. I see a lot of product managers basically try to collect evidence to support an idea which is not that good. I think that's a wrong path which you are going towards, right? So make sure you are not resistant to change, right? You adapt. So the ultimate goal is to serve the user rather than satisfy your desires of building something which you think is good enough. Yeah, I think these are all different forms where people might fail at creating MVPs.
I want to
Yeah,
add something there. Right? Because depending on the stage of the company, your MVP would vary. So, for example, we were talking about the Apple Vision Pro. Their MVP version took 5 years, and it is gonna cost each consumer like $3,500, which basically means they would have spent like hundreds of millions of dollars coming up to that prototype. But if you think of Bard versus OpenAI or ChatGPT, ChatGPT continue to test it as and when they continue to launch, and they already partnered with several companies before they launched it full blown to an end customer. Bard came and launched it a couple of weeks after that. It's still an MVP from Google standpoint, but it failed miserably because they were not ready yet at that point. So depending on the stage of your company, the MVP or the amount of money that you spend on MVP could vary a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. Those are some great tips. One thing I really liked about one of his statements, Sidhu, is it's not about just building some minimal feature, but building a value and trying to measure it, which is very important. Because you can build something as small, which may not be value added for customers, and which is a waste of time and effort, everyone.
We have mentioned Vision Pro. We have mentioned Vision Pro a lot of times, so we have to do a reaction video to that for sure.
Yep.
Definitely. All right. Now, since we talked about in the MVP, the use cases, our experiences, and how the pitfalls, I would like to wrap up this call by sharing few top secrets or top tips for any person who wants to execute an MVP. Funny, I'd like to go with you first. I mean, if you could give like two top key takeaways for our viewers, what would that be?
I think the very first one is constraints itself. Like before you do an MVP or before you do the test, make sure to define the constraints that you want to have. You might not be able to stick to it as you go through the process, but always have that constraint. This is my time, this is the amount that I want to spend, and then launch it. And then the second biggest one that I would want to tell people is make sure you actually need an MVP. Many times people will just think that, okay, I want to build an MVP just for the sake of it, but make sure you understand whether you need an MVP or not.
That's awesome. Siddhar, do you want to share your top two?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is, right, even before you get into MVP and all of that stuff, start with a goal, right? Like, why do you want to do it? Is it to validate your hypothesis, gauge interest, or encourage more people to work for your product, right? Define what the goal of the MVP is. Second one is, I would say, test it enough and validate your hypothesis to the point that you understand what the result is, rather than jumping into conclusions with what you have built. So these both are, I think, would be the primary things to consider while building MVPs.
That's awesome. My top two key takeaways are: have a clear value proposition before you're building an MVP, because that's very important on what you're chasing at, rather than something building for the sake of doing it. And the second thing is, have a clear exit criteria. When would you call off? And you cannot take an MVP forever. So it's pretty important. It needs to be a time bound, so you can measure your results and take a appropriate action. All right.
Yeah.
I think we talked, a lot about MVP. I'm sure viewers will enjoy this and they can use in their product development lifecycle. So I think that's what we have. All right. Thanks, everyone. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Everything Product.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you.